Time is 36 minutes after 10 on Highway Radio on 1.5 FM. And this morning, welcoming Layla Paruk Dorasami. Which one starts? Is it Paruk or Dorasami?
Whichever one you prefer. It doesn't make a difference.
You look wonderful this morning.
Oh, thank you, Malungi. It's so good to be here. I feel like it's been ages. It's amazing. It's been quite an interesting couple of weeks, hasn't it?
I know. Oh, I remember. The last time you were here was before the whole mayhem.
Yeah.
But praise God, you are back.
Oh yes,
it has been but we thank God that everything is gradually coming back to its normal place. Though we've lost so many lives during this time,
It's been sad.
Really, one does not know where to start when it comes to the lives that have been lost, and sometimes you don't even know what to say to those who have lost their loved ones, during this time. And we are talking no color here, we are talking all.
No, and it's in vain. I think that's the saddest thing. It's that lives were lost in vain. It's doesn't matter what color or gender. It's somebody's father, somebody's brother, somebody's son, and it's really not something anybody wants to ever have to go through.
That is so true. That is so true. Which brings us back to, so then when you talk marketplace, one may say so much that has been happening has caused a lot of shift in the marketplace, where people are left without jobs, where others, their businesses have been,
Definitely, I think COVID was one thing, but this you don't actually anticipate what can happen in a week. COVID's been a year, and it's been a challenging year, and then suddenly you get this. And you know what I find inspiring though, Malungi, is that we're such a resilient people.
Right.
And when stuff happens, it inadvertently brings us closer together.
That's true.
You see the kindness, and you see the generosity, and you see the hope, and the way people begin to stand together more united than ever before, and they help each other to rebuild. I think that's the beauty that comes from all of this. And when you think about God saying, "Yeah, I'll give you beauty for ashes," and we've been seeing it, and I think that's the hope we cling to. And it's wonderful because we serve a God of restoration. We serve a God who's a God of the impossible. And I think as Christians, as believers, we need to be able to cling to that. We need to be able to remind ourselves that come what may, we are not of this world. We serve a God who is able to do exceedingly abundantly. And I'm not just saying that. I'm saying that, we need to walk, we need to step out in faith, believing that God will restore and that He will provide. And I've seen it. I've seen even in that week of devastation, the way God has come through. And we actually sat there in awe multiple times, and we kept saying, God takes care of His children. People struggling to get formula for their babies, and in the most unbelievable ways how God has come through. So there's with all that takes place, I think what we need to continuously look for is that glimmer of hope.
That's true.
And there always needs to be hope in everything that we do, and even in our businesses. We may have had employees that have said things, that have done things, that they've made mistakes. We find a lot of people who have blindly followed, have followed very innocently into this mob mentality.
Right.
And it's sad. In fact, we had received a really good word about it the other day, where our pastor spoke about how when Absalom decided to go and overthrow David, the people who followed him innocently. Yeah.
Right.
And I think we need to be very, very cognizant of that. We need to realize that a lot of the people who are involved in these type of activities did it blindly. They followed innocently because they were promised things and they were told things. And I think our topic for today is very relevant based on that. It's giving feedback. We'll always make mistakes as human beings. No matter what we do, no matter how hard we try, we will make mistakes.
Right.
And we need to firstly be very open to receiving feedback. And we also need to know how to give good feedback.
Mm.
So yeah, you know, it's interesting that as we grow and as we learn, you know, the Bible talks about, you know, being gentle with our words,
Right, yes.
and wisdom, and also, you know, being willing to receive. You know, when somebody talks to you about mistakes that you've made, how do you receive that?
Right.
And yeah, you know, the reason I actually chose this topic was I was reflecting on the fact that when I was a young manager, I had what they would say high IQ but very low EQ.
Right.
So I was one of those people that would just scream all day.
All right.
And you know what I realized? It came from a place of immaturity. It came from a place of a lack of wisdom. And I was very blessed because I had an amazing manager, and we also had people along the way that helped shape and guide me. And one of the most amazing lessons that I learned was how to give constructive feedback.
Right.
You know, you don't realize that there's actually an art to it. And when you don't know how to effectively address a situation, you could end up breaking a person instead of building them. And that's very dangerous.
Right.
You know, I'll give you a scenario. I used to go through to clients to present feedback. And that feedback would come to me from junior staff who would put together a report, and they'd email it through to me, and I'd take a look at it, neaten it up, and take it through to client. But what would happen is, quite often, it would be way below standard.
Right.
And I would be completely frustrated. I'd yell, I'd scream, I'd say things like, oh, you're completely wasting my time, this is useless, this is not, what am I going to do with this? I might as well just do it myself. And you know, that comes from a place of frustration, that comes from a place of immaturity. And only as I began to grow and as I began to learn did I realize that it was completely unproductive for both the person I was giving the feedback to and myself. And we did a really amazing course. There was a lady that came through and did a team build with us, and she actually talked us through, and I sat there rolling my eyes thinking, really? She spoke about the fact, the words we use, how you approach a situation. How do you begin to address the fact that somebody has delivered substandard work, in your opinion?
Right.
You know, you firstly begin by acknowledging that they're a human, they're a person with feelings, and they deserve respect. They deserve consideration. And you know what? That they've done the work. So you thank them for the fact that they've done the work. You thank them for the fact that they've put in a lot of time attempting to put together something that they believed would be adequate, because they haven't been taught. They haven't been shown. And you know, when I began to adopt that policy, I would call the staff in and I'd say, okay, let's sit together. I'm going to show you what I'm changing so that next time you know what I prefer and what doesn't work for me. It completely changed our entire office environment. It changed relationships. It changed the quality of work that I began to receive, because not only were the staff more willing to try harder and to do better, they also didn't want to kill me anymore because I was a lot nicer, you know. It also made me feel better as a person, because I mean, how awful do we feel after we've just screamed and yelled all day? So it's definitely something that we need to consider as we grow, especially in the marketplace, that when we speak to someone, when we address situations, we need to address it from a perspective of building a person, not breaking them. Yeah. So on the flip side, there's the receiving of feedback. Wow. That is not something that I quite enjoyed. So being in a very corporate environment, we would have something called performance appraisals. So we'd have a whole list of KPIs, and we'd be measured against all these key performance areas twice, maybe once or twice a year. Oh, I dreaded them. I so dreaded them, because you'd sit there and somebody's actually scoring you. Can you imagine, Malungi, I'd walk in here and I'd say, okay, what score am I going to give you for this today? What score? And I mean, you're in a very vulnerable position. You're under the spotlight. I really disliked it until I started to embrace it from a perspective of, actually, if I can see my blind spots, then I can actually make them work for me. I can grow from this. I can develop. I mean, I remember my boss saying to me one day, she says, Leila, every day when I speak to you, you say, I am so irritated. So I said to her, but I am irritated. She says, well, I'm tired of hearing you say it. And immediately thereafter, every time I said those words, it was like echoing back in my ear. And instead of being offended by what she'd told me, I used it as an opportunity to grow.
Right.
Firstly, what is irritating me? How can I resolve that? What can I change in order to move forward from that? And what can I say that's positive instead of negative? Because you don't realize that you actually brush off onto other people. So if the first thing somebody hears when they speak to you is, I'm so irritated, they're not really going to want to speak to you very often.
Right.
So I think from a perspective of we need to be able to receive feedback. The Bible says in Proverbs 12 verse 5, it says, the way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice. So if we are hungry to grow, if we are willing to become better, we need to be open to the fact that sometimes we'll make mistakes.
Right.
And sometimes we need to be addressed. It needs to be something that, okay, what can I do to change this? If somebody says something to you and you feel, no, I don't think that's true.
Right.
I don't believe that I'm a negative person. Then you need to ask them questions. You need to say, in what way do you believe that I'm a negative person? How do you think I can improve? Because the whole point of it is growth and improvement.
Right.
So, it's definitely something that's an art to be developed. If I have to give you a few tips in terms of what do you focus on when you give feedback? You need to firstly get a balance between being too harsh and also completely avoiding it. So quite often we get managers who, instead of addressing a situation,
right,
they say, they keep quiet and they hope it goes away until it actually explodes.
Right.
And unfortunately that happens more often than we realize. Because, you don't want to hurt a person's feelings, so you'd rather not say it to them until it just grows and grows and grows. So we do also need to realize that not saying anything at all can be very detrimental.
Right.
We need to speak to a person from a level of respect. We mustn't speak down to them. You don't talk to somebody like they're a child or offend and insult them. So the words that we use are so important.
Right.
And then we need to consider what we're addressing. So if there is a situation that I need to address with you, I need to know exactly what I'm addressing. If an employee, for example, arrives late regularly, and it's starting to affect the team, everybody's starting to look at this person and go, seriously, are your working hours different from mine?
Right.
If I sit down with that employee, I need to say to them, listen, this is a situation that needs to be addressed. And how can we resolve it? What do we do moving forward? I don't then start saying, oh, and you also do this, and you also do that sometimes, and you also do this, because then it dilutes the conversation and you're not focusing on the issue at hand. You're actually nitpicking.
Right.
It makes a person actually feel defensive, and it'll make them feel like, is she here to address the actual situation, or does she just not like me? So, those type of things, we need to be gentle. We need to say, listen, I understand it can be a struggle for you to arrive at work on time, but what can we do to alleviate the challenges that you are experiencing? I understand you travel from quite a distance. Is there not a lift club we can maybe look at? Or, how can we improve the situation?
Right.
And then from a perspective of receiving criticism, we need to always remember, I like what my pastor once said. He says, a friend will love you just the way you are. A mentor loves you too much for you to stay the way you are.
Right.
And when you view it from that perspective, you're much more open to receiving feedback. You're much more open to the fact that sometimes some things need to be said. Sometimes certain things need to be addressed because unfortunately we're human and we make mistakes.
Right.
And we have blind spots.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely a fine balance, which if we're just a little bit more conscious of how we do it, could make a
mm,
world of difference in terms, especially of the response. Yeah.
It's 51 minutes after 10 on 101.5 FM. Yes, giving feedback. I'm looking at the wrong thing. Giving feedback, constructive feedback rather, in the workplace is so important. You're speaking about constructive feedback, and it's such. I think it's such a very important subject.
Absolutely.
When it comes to workers and employers and employees, in how, in fact, even among colleagues, how you deal with certain things constructively in a way that can assist someone instead of breaking them, as you say.
Yeah.
All companies need those kind of constructive. In fact, those kind of classes. You mentioned someone that would come in your workplace.
Yes.
To actually teach, or to that would come to.
You speak about that, Malungi, and what was really interesting was the exercise that we did.
Right.
She started with an exercise where she asked us to each write down our definition of love. And in a room full of people, no two definitions were the same.
Right.
And that was in order to illustrate the fact that every person has a different need.
Right.
And every person sees love differently. So what I may perceive as you being loving and caring towards me may not be what you would perceive. We speak about things like love languages.
Right.
The acts of service and the giving of gifts and those type of things, which makes us understand that different people receive not just love languages, but receive feedback differently. So her whole teaching was based on a model where we look at you get the left brains and the right brains.
Yes.
And she breaks it down further. So there's relators and there's organizers and there's different personality types.
Right.
And one of the things that I found most interesting was that different personality types give and receive feedback completely differently. So a relator, for example, before you can even start to address them, they see you coming. You walk into the room and they already have their defenses up. If your arms are folded, you are already shouting in their opinion. So it's absolutely fascinating when you start to understand these things. So I had a colleague who was a relator, and she would say to my boss, she says, Leila screams all the time. And I'd be like, I didn't scream at her. I don't know what she's talking about.
Right.
And she'd say, no, she screams at me all the time. She walks into my office and she'll stand at my door and scream. And I'd be like, no. I walk into her office, I stand at the door and my arms are folded, and that is her definition of screaming, because they pick up on body language. They pick up on tone. So if I have a slight tone in my voice, they'll immediately pick up on it.
Okay.
So she would guide us along in terms of how you communicate across different modes.
Right.
So if you're speaking to a relator, you need to actually lower your tone of voice so that you don't sound like you're screaming. You need to watch your body language. You need to approach the situation very gently and lovingly. Whereas you get personality types that you could walk into the room crying and they wouldn't even bat an eyelid, because they are just a lot, they receive that information very differently. So I think as you begin to understand personalities, and I think it's really important to know your team, to know that Malungi is a gentle, kind, very, very, very sensitive soul, and you don't speak to her. I'll give you an example. We had a receptionist. She was such an amazing person. We absolutely hit it off. I loved working with her, but she just would not get along with the other manager.
Okay.
And I was like, one day I just said to her, she was given a task by the other manager, which she didn't do. And this manager was fuming, so she came to me and she said to me, Leila, I gave her this task, she didn't do it. I don't know what's her problem. She does your work, she won't do my work. So I called her in and I said to her, okay, what's going on? Why will you not do the work? I mean, what has she done? Are you upset with her? She says she never says please. I was like, really? She says, yes. She'll walk past my desk, she'll throw it onto my desk, and she'll keep walking, and she'll talk to me as she's walking away. I was like, oh, okay. So I spoke to this other person. And I said,
Right.
this is what
I
she
think I would
said.
also see that as a bit of
Very offensive,
Yeah.
very like disrespectful.
right.
Whereas you get personality types who would be completely unfazed by that type of behavior. So we had a previous receptionist who was absolutely unaffected by that behavior, who was very used to working with that in that type of environment, who just got on with it. So, sometimes we are in environments where we think somebody doesn't like us,
Right.
or that person, just doesn't work well. It's not necessarily the person, but the personality.
Right.
And as we begin to understand this, we realize that person's not rude. That person's just wired that way. Some people are actually wired to be late. They perform better under pressure. They are not cognizant of timekeeping. So, yeah, it's actually a science. It's definitely worth investing in.
Right.
If you've got a work environment with a few staff, it's really good to get a professional in to assess, to get to know your people, because by understanding what makes them tick, you get the most out of them, and you're able to
Right.
help grow them.
Your workers.
Yes.
It's 57 minutes after 10. There is an employer that is tuned in. There is an employee as well that is tuned in. What would be your last words to them of advice?
I think as an employer, what I would like to say and what I've learned is that you have an opportunity to shape and mold people.
Right.
Do you have an opportunity to change their lives by growing them? I've seen people go from making tea in an office environment to being a manager, simply because time and effort has been invested in their growth.
Right.
And that's something that we need to take responsibility for. If we want to see this country grow and become, fulfill all the potential that it has, we need to look at growing people. And then as an employee, I had to make that shift. I had to understand that when I was given feedback, when I was told I was doing something incorrectly, I had to put aside my pride and I had to accept that, there's room for improvement.
Right.
And if on both ends people learn to work together, it can only be of benefit. There's so much that we can achieve as a nation.
Right.
We need to do it on the same team.
I like the fact that you are saying as a nation.
As a nation.
There's so much.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So there's growth from here.
If it's healthy, it grows.
Right.
I love that.
Right.
So we need to keep those environments healthy. We need to keep those channels of communication open, and we will see the growth. South Africa is such an amazing country. We have so much to offer the world. We just need to start working together, and building hope and building people.
Right. It's so powerful. Thank you so much, Leila. Once again, you're on Facebook, right?
Yes, I am.
As Leila Paruk, Dorasabi Paruk.
Oh, well, an easier page to look for is leila.co.za, spelled as Laiela.
That's your website, right?
It's a Facebook page as well as my website, and yeah, you'll find all my info on there.
Awesome. And some of these clips that we are sharing here.
Yes, I do upload them. I also upload them onto YouTube, so
Amen.
easy to find.
Amen. It is 59 minutes after 10. Thank you so much once again. Until next time, right here on the Brunch Tonight. Let's go straight to the news with Portia. It's a shame. Sorry about that. I'm sure, but it didn't